Yeah, so welcome everyone. Really lovely to see you. The thing I have to be careful of is looking at you too much, because if I look down there at Jnanavaca, he's doing a solitary at Adhisthana. If I look at you, Jnanavaca, oh, he's disappeared. You can't. You look like I look like I'm looking down. So Jnanavaca and I are going to have to remember to look at you. So welcome everyone to this retreat on the three myths that we're going to be exploring. I don't want to talk too much about the theme, because Jnanavaca will be talking about the theme. I want to, first of all, obviously just welcome you, particularly welcome to all of you outside the UK. It's really, really wonderful. One of the wonders of this moment is that we can be in community across the world. Recently, I've been doing a Journey in the Guide course, and we had somebody on the team for the course who was zooming in from Mexico, and he was on the team. We've had people zooming in from New York, from Central America, from all over Europe. So it's a wonderful opportunity to meet. What we need to do, though, is to try and imaginatively meet together, even though most of you, I always get these little glimpses of your bedrooms and your pot plants and your shrine and your shelf, and I have to stop myself making too many comments about people's interior design. So you get these odd things, don't you, where nowadays to introduce yourself, you also have to introduce a bit of your bedroom, refer back. We've got this wonderful, beautiful shrine behind us, but not everybody will have. Anyway, welcome all of you. Really, really lovely that you can tune in. Just to be really clear from the onset, so this is the beginning of our retreat. So some of you will have booked on the retreat. You can still book on the retreat if you want to. There's still places. There are many places. We're not going to book up, so you can still book on the retreat. Also, what we've done is we're making the evening talks like tonight. So some of you are, hello, if you're watching us on YouTube. Hope you stopped the pop video you were watching a few moments ago, and you're now onto us. So welcome if you're tuning onto YouTube. So we will make the evening talks available to anyone. So do tell your friends, they might not be able to be on the retreat, but I'd really recommend that you, if you can, you follow the talks in the evening. And they'll be available on the Adhisthana YouTube channel. Do subscribe to that channel. That would be really great. And then you can just watch them as we go on. So all the events on the retreat, Caroline and James and Sanjay are going to be working very hard on the tech. One of the things you don't see when you're seeing this picture of us just now is just how much there are lights and wires and clocks, and sometimes we take photographs of it to show you the back side of it, as it were. Never mind, let's move on. I can't remember where I was going with that. So yes, they're going to try and make sure on the retreat, for those of you on the retreat, that an audio of each presentation will be available an hour later, and a video will be available about 4 hours later, we think. But these evenings will be live streamed onto YouTube, so you can let your friends, anyone can come and join us in the evenings. If you can, what I particularly recommend is that you join us for the whole, if you're just joining us for the evenings, see if you can join the whole set, or at least watch the whole set. Exploring, I hope, in quite a lot of details, these three myths. And they need quite a lot of thought, quite a lot of exploration. They're not something we can reduce into some sort of handy things. So I would personally want to recommend that you watch the whole series of talks. In a certain sense, well, not in a sense, they all go together very, very much. So before I say more about the evening, so in terms of the shape of the retreat, so every morning at 7 o'clock, you'll be joining the Adhisthana community and us for the usual Adhisthana morning meditation. 7 o'clock, a break, and then another meditation till 8:30. So Sadaloka will be leading that. So he'll be surrounded by lights. He's here in a moment in the shrine room. So he'll be appearing every morning with the tech team. So you can tune into the meditation here at Adhisthana at 7 o'clock. And we'll be doing the Jnanavaca as we always do here. And we'll be starting off like that. And then at 10:30, oh, sorry, yeah, all the times I'll use UK time. The attempt to then translate them into other times is undoable for me. So yeah, all the time. Tante Chitter's smiling. She knows how terrible I am at numbers, anything involving numbers. Yeah, so that's UK time. So 10:30 UK time, which, oh, I don't know what time that will be for you in Melbourne, will be, there'll be some more meditation teaching. I'm going to say a tiny bit in a moment about what that will be. That will include time for questions, yeah? So there'll be some meditation teaching, you know, a longish 40-minute meditation, bit of a break, and then a chance for questions. We did want to make sure that there was ample opportunity for you to, for us to engage with each other. So as you go, see if you have any questions, put them in the chat, yeah? And what we'll do is we'll collate questions together. You know, we might say, look, there's been quite a few questions on this area. Could you talk more about that? So we'll collate all the questions together. So put that in the chat. So you might want to, you know, as a talk goes on, you might want to put them on. Let's be a bit careful of putting too much in the chat during the talks. And let's try not to do it in the meditation. We've been doing morning meditations at the London Buddhist Centre. And I say, close your eyes. And what you're saying, hello, Julie from Stockport, you know, hello, David from Belgium, you know, and you think, no, take your fingertips away from the keyboard. You don't need to tell people to close their eyes anymore. You just need to, please remove your fingertips from the keyboard. Yeah, so see, let's see if we can remove our fingertips from the keyboard for the meditation. But as the days go on, you might well have questions, and you can put them in the chat, and then we'll collate them and try to answer some of them as best as we can. Yeah. So we'll every morning at 10:30. That sort of block of practice from 10:30 to 12:45. That will involve about half an hour of questions. Yeah? In the afternoon, we'll have some more meditation at 4:30 British summertime, and that will go on till 5:45. But with that one, we'll just have some teaching and then another meditation. So you'll need to have your nap before that, because you know what it's like. It's so tiring looking into screens like this all the time, Zoom or YouTube. So make sure you're ready in the afternoon to be able to hear some more teaching, and then we'll do a meditation. And then every evening at 7:30, one of us will give the next talk in this sequence of talks, exploring this theme of the three myths. But yes, as I say, do open the talks to friends that you feel might be interested. So I'm really pleased that we're coming to do this. Actually, Sadanandi wrote to Jnanavaca and I about a year ago, asking if she should come. And of course, it was going to be an in-person retreat. And then, you know, like we're all in this real period of uncertainty, and it seems to be getting, certainly in the UK, it's getting more uncertain again. I always mean to say, but I hope you're all well, and that your family and loved ones are well, and your friends are well. Things are changing again, aren't they? Certainly in the UK, and looking more worrying again. I know some places are still in lockdown, so I hope you're all well. But yes, we were invited about over a year ago to come and do an in-person retreat, and then we've scaled it down to a bit shorter because we were going to do, I think, a 9-day retreat, and that just feels too long to do any on Zoom at the moment or on YouTube. So, and what we're going to be exploring is these three myths, the three myths of what any deep spiritual life really is. That's what we're going to be exploring, how the three myths, Subhuti in his lecture called them models or myths, but he prefers myths, and we've kept with myths. So I don't know when any of you were around, but I remember the International Order Convention of 2013. 2003, oh yeah, I thought it was longer ago than that. Another numbers problem. I recently gave a talk that I started off saying I was ordained in the year 2000. And Parabandhu had to shout out, no, you weren't. You were ordained in 1990. It was the O that threw me. Anyway, you don't need to know that. So in 2003, which does feel more like it, I do remember the event, I just don't remember the day. I remember being in the hall watching Subhuti give this talk on the three myths, and it was called Immanence versus Transcendence, I think, the talk. And I remember it was one of those talks that I vividly remember. Bhante chaired it, as far as I remember. And I seem to remember Bhante saying that was one of the most important contributions Subhuti's ever made. That's my memory of his chairing. Other people here might remember, but I remember being there very, very clearly, probably even sitting next to Jnanavaca. And I remember thinking that this is very, very deeply important, this talk. I remember it partly because, that time after a talk where you say, that was fantastic, when you're uplifted and roused and gladdened. And I remember telling some of my friends, that was, that, and they were saying, yeah, it's good. I think, no, it wasn't good. no, it's not. I'm not saying good. I wasn't just inspired. It's like important. That's what I found about it. I thought this is a really important talk. There's something in here that's very, very important. I think the importance of that talk has actually grown, and I think Subhuti, Subhuti's got this incredible visionary capacity, and I think he was a bit seeing forward at that time, seeing actually now in a way. I think it's I remember being struck by how important it was. And that talk, I don't know whether any of you remember, was followed up by an article in Madhyamavani called The 3 Myths of the Spiritual Life, which you can still find online. I said to Jnanavaca, I could suggest they download that now. And he said, oh no, don't do that, because then he said it better than we do. So don't download it now. Because we want to make it look like it's all our thinking. We want you to think that how did they come up with this? But yeah, do download it after the retreat. But anyway, it's still available, so you can get it online. And then Subhuti was also interviewed by Vishwapani for Dharma Life. Anyone remembers Dharma Life? So he was, thank you. Little bit of audience participation. Anyway, do try and nod and smile at the jokes, especially. Thank you. Apadar at least is doing some nodding. So it's actually a bit of a general rule for the retreat. If you could do a lot of nodding and smiling, make your gestures quite big, that's great. Because I can't pick up social signs. Thank you, Srivati, a little bit. So, yeah. Anyway. So what we'll be get on with it. What we'll be exploring is these 3 myths of self-transcendence, self-surrender, and self-discovery. We're using this word self-transcendence rather than Bhante's use, which is self-development. We'll say a little bit more about why we're using that particular word. But that's what we're going to be exploring through the retreat and through this set of talks. So Jnanavaca is going to set the scene for that this evening. The only things I want to say is, firstly, that this is an exploration that Jnanavaca and I are on ourselves and are taking you on. One of my favorite poets is the American poet Wallace Stevens, and he talks about what I think the last published poem that he ever published in the magazine is only about 8 lines long. He talks about thinkers without final thoughts. And that was like days before he died, he wrote that, thinkers without final thoughts. For me, that's what I want to be. That's what we're doing. We're trying to think without final thoughts. Yeah. So this is an exploration, and we want you watching on YouTube or on Zoom to tune into it in the spirit of exploration, not in the spirit of, oh, actually, but I'm not sure I agree with that, or I think this. Let's just try and explore these deep matters together. Let's all try and be thinkers without final thoughts. And see, as I say, if you can stay with the whole, even if you can't sort of watch it live, see if you can catch up with the talk so you can follow the whole thinking without final thoughts. There's lots of really valuable things to think about. The most valuable, I think. We'll be particularly showing that each of these myths has its own particular strengths and its own weaknesses. Or Subhuti in his article talks, each myth has got a front and a back, and that they come together so that there's a value, a power in each myth, and it's also got attached to that a way of taking it literally, a way of it being actually unhelpful. And we're trying to be exquisitely conscious of that. And then we're going to say, and Bhante said again and again, one of the things I remember when I first reading Bhante in seminar, what you see with Bhante in seminar again and again is he kept on coming back to literalism. He keeps on talking about literalism and the danger of literalism. And I remember once, this is when I was quite newly ordained, I remember reading so much of Bhante in seminar at the time. And that is a constant refrain in Bhante's teaching, is the danger of literalism. Don't take this literally. Be careful of literalism. People take this literally. And what I felt at the time is Bhante obviously thinks it's a very important point, this question of literalism. But at the time, I thought, it seems quite straightforward to me. Yeah, don't take it literally. Okay, we move on. But the amount of times Bhante emphasizes not to take things literally is itself a real teaching. And I think I'm only just now, years and years later, thinking, oh, I see why he kept going on and on. Seminar after seminar, you'll see him go off this way and then come back, but don't take that literally. Go off that way, come back, but don't take that literally. Go above and don't take that literally. And it's only now that I can see why he's doing that. So that's a way of starting us to think about this series of talks. But now Jnanavaca will appear in front of you and talk more, set the scene for this evening.
Great. Well, a very, very warm welcome from me too. Very lovely to see you here. And as Maitreyabandhu said, you know, particularly it's lovely to know that people who couldn't have come on an in-person retreat are here. All of you joining us from Australia and New Zealand, and well, many of you even in the UK may not have been able to make it to Adhisthana. So it's a delight personally to see, well, to know in a way that you're there, as well as see some of you in these little boxes. And as Maitreyabandhu said, I too just hope that you're all well. Maitreyabandhu and I live in a community above the LBC, and there's 10 of us in the community. And when the pandemic broke, we kind of immediately assumed that, you know, with 10 of us, we're going to get ill. So far, none of us have. And but as Maitreyabandhu said, in the UK, things are changing, and they are, I know, in other countries in the world. And goodness, we've been teaching recently in India, myself and Maitreyabandhu, and it's sort of really just sobering to know what's happening in India. And what people are struggling with. So anyway, I hope you're all well. So yeah, I want to follow on from Maitreyabandhu and start, in a way, exploring a little bit about the context of these three myths. I'm not going to go into the myths themselves very much, or at least not very much. One of the things, well, I was at that 2003 convention as well. It was probably my second convention. And I can remember being sort of having my socks blown off and thinking, wow, this is such a inspiring talk and such an exciting framework to think about. And I can also remember thinking that this will sort of change everything. But the whole sort of after the article, I don't think we heard. Well, I didn't hear very much about this model, this framework. I don't know what else to call it, of the three myths. And Subhuti has coined this term, so it's his coinage. And actually, well, maybe we'll come on to this, but there are four. He later on in the article talks about self-transcendence or self-development, as he calls it, self-surrender, self-discovery, and then the fourth one he starts to talk about is emergence. And maybe briefly what I'll sort of say is that how he talks about it is that you can think of the goal of Buddhahood, of enlightenment, as being without or within. And if you think of the Buddha as outside of us, and we're moving towards Buddhahood, well, self-development is in a way the myth that goes towards Buddhahood. It's the myth of growth. It's the myth that Bhante's particularly emphasized, self-transcendence, as we're calling it. And we're calling it self-transcendence because self-development might not imply that you can break free of self, see through self, if you see what I mean, whereas self-transcendence has more of a sense that, yeah, you can see through the deluded notion of fixed and separate self a fixed self-writ selfhood. So self-transcendence. Self-surrender is also with the goal outside. I'm sort of using my right hand as a sort of way of saying this is the goal, this is Buddhahood, and I'm here. And self-surrender would be the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as it were, coming down to us, or us opening up to them. It would be Dharma Niyama processes in Bhante's later language descending, as it were, and us becoming open, us serving, and it's the myth that obviously goes with devotion and receptivity to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. There's also the possibility of imagining the goal, truth, Buddhahood, enlightenment as within, and of us discovering it. This is what Subhuti referred to in terms of immanence. He was using immanence and transcendence from the Christian tradition, sort of provocatively, but immanence, this notion that God is within, well, Buddhahood is within us, within everything in existence, in reality, and that we can discover enlightenment within. That self-discovery. Emergence is a notion that, yes, enlightenment is within and always present. And we just have to sort of get out of the way. It's not such a willed discovery so much as a allowing Buddhahood, enlightenment, reality to emerge, us relaxing into it. Anyway, we'll say more about that, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what those three, well, we're going to be exploring all four over the course of the week, both in terms of practice and in terms of thinking about them, reflecting on the front and back, as Maitreyabandhu said, as Subhuti said, pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of each of these myths and approaches to the Dharma life. Speaking personally, I've been drawn at different times to different sort of versions of these myths, or different myths, probably more to self-surrender and self-discovery than to self-development. I don't think I've been particularly inspired to improve or grow. I think I was probably always too lazy or not bothered enough. I can remember, in a way, what as a boy sort of sparked my curiosity was just this notion that there was more to the world than I was being sort of shown, told, but also more than I could perceive. So I was interested in magic, like a lot of kids are. And then when my dad died, I was still a boy, I was 11, and I started to communicate with him psychically. I won't go into how, but I was convinced that, and I still am convinced, that I was in communication with his consciousness, or whatever, I didn't know what to call it, after his death, which sparked that sort of curiosity. It sort of, that spark was already there, but it really set it alight, I think. I was convinced, I knew now that death wasn't the end, which then meant, well, what was life? What was life? I mean, what was life? What did it mean? What was it for? But what were we doing? I had a sense, probably not very articulated, that I wasn't seeing the whole picture, and therefore there was a truth that would contextualize what it was to be alive. And that truth somehow had to include death. Yeah, so that was part of my sort of approach to the Dharma. I later on went to study physics at university, and part of what I was trying to do was see if science could offer or teach me the nature of reality, the nature of existence. And I knew that modern physics had weird and wonderful theories and explanations. What I came away with was, in a way, disappointment. I realized that physics, science, modern science wasn't going to be able to give me answers. Particularly, it couldn't give me answers about how to live. At the same time, what it did do was convinced me that common sense reality wasn't true, that the world is not as it appears. And I want to come back to that a little bit later on in what I have to say. Studying physics convinced me that at least a common sense scientific materialism, Subhuti, I think, calls it appearancism, this notion that things are as they appear to be. I was convinced by studying physics that that's not true. That even the sort of modern physicist perspective that everything is matter was sort of much more mysterious when you try and really understand what quantum physics is saying about what the nature of matter is. So what I'm trying to say is that for me personally, there was, from an early age, a sense that there was a larger truth, which then brought me to the Dharma. And I was interested in discovering that. It didn't occur to me that I had to grow and change in order to realize the truth. So when I came to the LBC and the first course I did, I was very, very excited to come to the Buddhist Center, scared and excited. You know, it took me a long time to find the Buddhist Center. It was pre-internet days, and you know, it wasn't easy. I can remember looking up in yellow pages. I thought Buddhism was really Zen. I mean, Zen was the only form of Buddhism that you could practice in the West that made sense, or didn't make sense, or whatever. But I can remember looking up in the yellow pages. Some of you won't know what the yellow pages are, either because you're in Australia or elsewhere, or because you're too young. The yellow pages was a big fat directory, telephone directory, but listed businesses. And so I thought the Buddhist Center would be in the yellow pages. And then I looked under B and it wasn't. And so I looked under Z for Zen, and there was something called Zen W3. And I can remember with heart in my mouth, and I was very, very excited and nervous. I picked up the phone. I was probably in my late teens, and dialed, you know, the number for Zen W3. And it turned out to, well, I said, you know, would they teach me? Would they take me on as a disciple? It turned out to be a restaurant in North London. W3, NW3 was a postcode for a restaurant in North London. Anyway, that was the first sort of spiritual disappointment. I've had many more since in my life. But anyway, self-development, when I did come to, or self-transcendence, when I came to the Buddhist Center, the first course, I can remember it was Sasana Jyoti in Kevala, teaching a Buddhism course, and they taught, the whole course was on ethics, on the precepts, and I can remember thinking, I don't want to be more kind or generous. And what has that got to do with the nature of reality anyway? And, you know, how does offering a cup of tea to somebody that isn't going to be offering me, you know, taking me any closer to enlightenment? These days, I know a little bit better, I think. Anyway, self-transcendence wasn't particularly in my frame of reference. And I was more drawn, I think, and have been, to a more devotional approach of surrender, and then more, since ordination in a way, to something more like self-discovery. What I want to say, though, is that in the order, particularly in the last, I don't know how many years, but more recently, there's been more and more diversity in terms of approaches and practice. I think when Subhuti gave this talk, that was probably starting to happen. But I think it's continued. More and more people are practicing in different ways. And of course, unlike when I tried to find the Buddhist Center, there are so many Western Buddhist teachers, and so much Dharma available online. And I think that we've got to be really canny, I think, and careful, but also really intelligent about how do we interpret different teachings and approaches, whether they come from within the order or whether they come from without. How do we stop ourselves from polarizing? I've done my fair share of polarizing. I might confess to various things later on, but how do we stop sort of fragmenting as a Sangha into, no, I've got the right approach and you're wrong? Not just in terms of practices, because I think, well, actually, that's another topic in a way, different practices. But practices, I think, aren't perhaps so dangerous as the views that underlie the practices. It's the views which I think are so, well, myths, as we're calling them, which are so potent, but also potentially divisive. That's been the background of part of us, Maitreyabandhu and I, wanting to do this retreat, is seeing if Subhuti's framework from 2003, whether it offers, and I don't know if it completely does, and for me it's still definitely something that I'm trying to work out and understand deeper, but whether it can offer some sort of way of understanding each other when we approach the Dharma from different perspectives, from different views, and probably that are drawn to different practices, whether we can do that or not. And I don't know whether we can or not. I think it's really important that we try, and I really think it's important that we understand the dangers of literalism that Maitreyabandhu was talking about. I perhaps say a little bit of a story that was important for me. In 2007, I think, I was on a retreat with Prakasha, a just sitting retreat, a pure awareness retreat, an entering pure awareness retreat. And had a very significant, it was a very, very significant retreat for me, and opened up a whole new dimension of my mind, my practice, my way of thinking about the Dharma. It was very strong and powerful. At that time, Bhante was very, very, and I believe rightly so, being careful and even critical of any practice or teaching that implied the doctrine of Buddha nature or Tathagata. You know, he was very wary of the dangers of that myth, which is the myth underlying self-discovery, you could say. He was really, really concerned that it would lead to us stopping making effort, that it would mean thinking that we were Buddhas already, etc., etc. And I was in a conflicted state, because I consider Bhante my teacher, I consider myself to be a disciple, and yet I'd had this big experience, certainly, you know, until that time, as it were, a big experience on a sort of pure awareness retreat. And I went to see Bhante, and he was just really, really confidence giving, just confidence giving. He didn't go into it very much. On a later day, I said to him something like, Buddha nature does seem to be true, Bhante. And he just smiled and said, yes, it does, doesn't it, Jnanavaca? And it's fine if you don't take it literally. It's fine if you don't take it literally. So that really taught me something, that Bhante was on the one hand publicly saying, look, let's not go down this route. On the other hand, to me personally, he was encouraging, as long as I didn't take it literally. Anyway, we don't have Bhante now, personally, physically here, present, to do that sort of work for us individually. Do you see what I mean? I felt really blessed to have him say, yes, that's fine, you're on the right track, but don't take it literally. And I think we have to do that for each other. Maybe we are doing that for each other. Maybe we are blessed with Kalyana Mitra's preceptors who do that for each other. But I think we're going to have to get more intelligent as a Sangha about different approaches. The next point I want to make is, oh no, maybe before I move on, just to come back to practices. we're not going to sort of go into talking about practices too much, but you do, of course, have practices that seem to epitomize one myth more than the other two or three. So, entering pure awareness was particularly emphasizing emergence in this case. But what I also want to add, and what I was, Subhuti and I were talking recently about this, is that probably any practice contains, if not all the myths, then certainly more than one. That it's not as simplistic as it might first appear. So, for example, when I just sit, my sadhana is very somehow, the flavor of my sadhana, I sit in the presence of my yidam in my mind. I'm not trying to do the sadhana, but it feels like a formless sadhana. There's some effort there as well. Sometimes if I am distracted, I do try and bring myself back. I know that, the purists would say you just sit, you just sit, you just sit. But if I'm lost in prapancha, I want to come back. That's. Do you see what I mean? There's effort at that basic level. It's not as simple as saying it's just one myth for one practice. That's what I'm trying to say. Although, yes, certain practices do privilege. But the reason I say that partly is that sometimes I and others have had arguments, polarized arguments, fallen out over practices. And again, I think we need to be, I need to be a bit more careful and thinking more intelligently about approaches and myths and views, you could say. But views sounds too cognitive. It's not just a cognitive, consciously held view. When I don't know, want to sort of serve my yidam in my sadhana, or lay my life down to manjidosha, it's not just a cognitive view. It's a myth. I would. So then that brings me on to the importance of views. So I guess if there is a moment, or more than a moment, an experience of insight, in the insight experience, actually we're going to try and use the word pranya rather than insight. It's possibly less likely that we can think of pranya as being appropriated as something that I can just appropriate into my ego identity and have, whereas insight can lend itself, just as a word, to implying it's something that I can grasp after and grab and own and have. Yeah? But anyway, moments of vision, pranya, insight, whatever you want to say, will of course be without a conceptual framework. They will be beyond views. There will be no view, as it were. They will be pure realization, non-dual awareness, without concepts having any hold on them. Beyond me and you and time and space and so forth. But views will come back when we're not in that non-dual awareness state. They come back, and whatever vision experience we've had, I suspect that we can't help but interpret it in a view framework that we hold. I think there's no way around that. I'm not even saying that there should be a way around that. So you could say that before a vision experience, we need views because how else are we going to practice? And then even to interpret a vision experience, there will be views, there will be a framework. And this notion of not taking any framework or view literally is so important. I think to allow both the vision to unfold in its natural way, but also because no model or framework is probably enough in all sorts of situations, in all situations. So for example, for me, having said that I've never been particularly drawn to self-transcendence, what's happened in my life is that I found myself being given, offered, and accepting responsibilities in our institutions. And finding that taking up responsibility in our movement has forced me to grow, to go beyond myself, to go beyond my preferences. Yeah, it's done that. Or simply, just living with other people, or trying to be a Kalyana Mitra to people has forced me to go beyond my preferences and drawn more out of me. The way I've interpreted taking on responsibility in those institutions has often been in terms of service and surrender. But nevertheless, there's been growth. Do you see what I mean? At different points in my life, or different aspects of my life, have called for different models. Sometimes when I meditate, I might be just trying to open up to pure awareness or non-dual awareness or whatever it is within. Other times I'll be doing my sadhana, and other times I'll be trying to talk to a friend or in a meeting talking about some aspect of our order and movement when I'd rather not be. And there are different models at play, I think, if I were to examine them. So what I'm trying to say is that no one model will probably serve all aspects of our life. And indeed, as we practice, probably different models, myths will come to the fore. So I think we need some dexterity, lightness, I guess, with our own approach to prajna. Yeah, I do really think that if we weren't taking things so literally, probably, well, that's what would save us when we have more and more diverse ways of practicing, maybe. The other thing that I want to just touch on is Bante's teaching of vision and transformation. Vision and transformation. So, the vision experience might be beyond all conceptual notions and views. But then what about transformation? Recently in the order, in the last number of years, there's been a lot of emphasis on insight and achieving insight and ways of doing that. And I think that's probably healthy. It was probably a necessary corrective. But I'd also like us to remember the transformation part, which seems to be 99% of the Dharma life, transformation, sort of unfortunately. Or maybe it's just me, maybe some of you are able to abide in vision. For me, I also need to think in terms of transformation. And the other thing I want to say is I feel skeptical, now I might be proven wrong, I feel skeptical of any models that seem to imply that we've arrived and that put a cap on either vision or transformation. Now, I could be wrong, but this is my intuition, so I want to share it with you, that I think that vision has depth, insight, prajna has depth to it. It's not that you just, this is, yeah, it's just my view. I don't know if others will share it. I don't believe that, say we're talking about the vision into anatta, I don't think that it's a once and for all matter. I think it has depth to it. I think we can go deeper and deeper and deeper into realizing the truth of any of the actioners, but also that what prajna opens up, what insight opens up, what the lakshanas, or realizing the truth of the lakshanas with insight opens up is another dimension. Bante's talked about it in terms of spiritual rebirth. It's another dimension. He's talked about it. He's also given us the image from the Vajrayana of the 5 Buddha mandala. All the qualities of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas open up. We walk through a doorway with prajna, with insight, and open up to the jnanas, the wisdoms of the Buddhas. And I don't believe that there's an end to that. I don't believe that you just do the 5 jnanas and say, I've arrived. That's my view. Transformation also seems to me endless. The path of transformation feels like, well, how can I ever say I've done it? That I've reached the end of metta, for example. Anyway, others might disagree that maybe there is an end point. I like the fact that Bante has talked about enlightenment as a horizon point that keeps them opening up. That it's limitless creativity, boundless creativity. So yeah, vision and transformation, and I like the fact that there's depth to vision. I've been quite struck by Rob Berbier's book, Seeing That Frees, and I've read it a number of times. And one of the aspects of it that I like, he shares a lot of sort of perspectives that I think Bante shares, although I think there are some important differences as well. But one of the things I like is that he seems to, the book Seeing That Frees is about meditations on emptiness. And he seems to imply, or more than imply, that there's no end to going deeper into the mystery of emptiness, for example. So I said quite a lot there. I said something about there's no end points, at least that's what I think, to vision or to transformation. I've tried to say, look, let's emphasize transformation as well as vision. They both need to be emphasized, of course. And I've tried to also say something a bit clunkily about spiritual death and rebirth, that there's insight into the lakshanas, insight into that there's no fixed and separate real me. But then what that is meant to do is lead to an opening up into boundless vistas that Bante's talked about as spiritual rebirth. That's the 5 Buddha mandala, that's the yidams, that's all the Buddha and Bodhisattva qualities. Okay, and I'm going to say maybe 1 or 2 more things about prajna, about insight. For me, the context for insight, for prajna, for vision, feels very, very important. What I mean by the context is well, partly I mean these myths, but partly I mean what is insight for? What is our wisdom prajna for? I was listening to a talk. Rob Berbier died recently, and I was listening to some of his recent talks. And one of the things he was saying is, well, traditionally, the Buddha talked about the ending of suffering. The ending of suffering, of course, we know that. He was also saying, though, that the whole of the Pali Canon, all the suttas in the Pali Canon, would have sat in a context where people believed in rebirth and believed in this endless round of samsara. So that the ending of suffering was like a huge cosmic event, because it was the ending of the round. It really was the deathless in that sense. Rob Berbier was saying, well, many of you, to his listeners, he was saying, many of you won't believe in rebirth. And increasingly, Western Buddhists are skeptical about anything that they haven't experienced. And, anyway, there's more of a sense of that this life might be it. And many of you don't believe in rebirth. So he was then saying, well, ask yourself, what are you practicing for? And if the answer is, I just want to end suffering, but all I've got is this life, me and this life. If the answer is, I want to end suffering in this life for myself, what he said is, how does that sound compared to this huge cosmic vision that was the part of the tradition? How does that sound? Now, he didn't answer that. He was far too polite. But I think what he was trying to say, and I'm not so polite, what he was trying to say is that it sounds small. It sounds small and rather, I don't know, even self-centered. Now, it might not sound small and self-centered to you. So let me just speak personally. To me, it sounds like if all I was interested in was ending suffering in this life, well, touch wood, so far, I haven't had a huge amount of suffering in this life. I'm temperamentally quite able to be happy in quite a range of conditions, either on my own or with other people. You know, give me a bar of chocolate and, you know, I can make it last a month and be grateful. And so ending suffering for myself in this life just doesn't motivate me to practice, to get up in the morning. Not enough. I wanted to know what was the answer to life and death, and I knew that death wasn't the end. So what is going on? That's what motivates me. So for me, a Dharma life has to incorporate a bigger vision of lifetimes of this samsaric ground, and it has to incorporate practicing for the sake of others. Otherwise, it's not big enough. It's not, what is insight for? What am I doing with whatever insights I've had, or trying to deepen them, unless it's in this bigger context. So for me, the Bodhisattva ideal provides that context. Now, I know it doesn't for all order members. And I know some people are sort of, well, that's just fantasy or myth in the not so positive sense of the word. All I'm trying to say is that that's what I believe is the largest possible context that the tradition, the Buddhist tradition, has come up with, the most magnificent context. And I believe at ordination, that's what we, you know, we're vowing to be part of. That's what Bhante's said is the myth of the order, the Bodhisattva. And then, of course, that grand mythic vision of becoming part of the Bodhisattva, or becoming as a Sangha the Bodhisattva, has to, I guess, translate down to how do we treat each other? How do we get on as a Sangha? And yeah, I said that I'd confess. Well, I think I have at times added to the polarization. So I was one of the people railing against Jnanavaca when he was teaching pure awareness, and others, and saying, well, I'm not sure about this, and da, da, da. And then lo and behold, I have this big opening up experience on a pure awareness retreat. Da, 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 da. So, you know, I've added to my to sometimes the unhelpful ways that we talk about the Dharma in the order, and probably I'll carry on doing that, because I think I'm certainly not past literalism and a sense of being right based on egotism. But I hope that we can find ways that are more intelligent in terms of talking to each other. And lastly, I just want to say, if the myth, that the overriding context isn't the Bodhisattva ideal, if that's not it, then I think we've got to be really careful that the context isn't just secular materialism. I think secular materialism is the greatest danger to Buddhism in the West. You know, we've got all sorts of other dangers, I know, but secular materialism, nihilism really, in a dressed up form, is what Buddhism, it's the water that many of us swim in our Western cultures. Although if you're watching in India, I suspect that it's happening even in India. It's not just the West in geographical terms. Modern culture, postmodern culture, the default assumption, if you don't question it, is that this life is all there is, and that matter is all there is, and that we are just biological machines, and that when we die, the lights will go out. Consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of brain function. And if that is our underlying default myth, and it is a myth in the wrong sense, in the not so positive sense of the word, then Buddhism becomes at best a sort of therapeutic adjustment to make ourselves not suffer so much while we're here. Yeah, and if that's it, I'd rather, I don't know, eat cake or do something that's easier. Actually, that's not completely true. I don't think I could stop practicing now, but there is a certain paucity to that view. So part of the invitation of this week is to, well, or if you're watching at home later on, is to question what are our underlying default myths. When do we slip into eternalism or nihilism? But I've just pointed out that I think nihilism, in this very sort of common sense guise of secular materialism, is really dangerous for many of us, and for more broadly Buddhism in the West. That's what Nietzsche thought Buddhism would become. You know, he didn't, he wasn't, I don't know how knowledgeable about Buddhism he was, but he thought that when people stopped believing in God after the death of God, we would just all be nihilists, but Buddhism would come along, and Buddhism would help us adjust to this existential nihilism and make it more comfortable by offering therapies like meditation and you know, other therapies, I guess. Anyway, I think he was very prescient, so we've just got to perhaps be alive to that. I sometimes say to people when I'm challenging you know, them on secular materialist kind of views, I used to have live with a friend who was so dyed hard in the wool secular materialist. He used to say, look, if the Buddha had been alive now and understood brain science, he too would have said that consciousness was just a byproduct of the brain. And I used to say, don't be so arrogant, which wasn't the best answer. But more recently, I was reading Ian McGilchrist. I don't know if you've heard of Ian McGilchrist. He's written this wonderful, extraordinary book called The Master and His, sorry, I can't get my words out, The Master and His Emissary. And Maitreyabandhu and I, this is a little plug, at the end of this month, I'm going to interview Ian McGilchrist, so tune in to that. Ian McGilchrist is a psychiatrist. What else is he? He's a neuroscientist, and he also taught, I think he taught literature, didn't he? At I don't know which university. So that's quite a range, isn't it? To be a neuroscientist, a psychiatrist, and a professor of literature. Anyway, in The Master and His Emissary, he talks about the brain, and he also talks about Western culture. And what's really interesting is that there you've got a scientist, a doctor, a psychiatrist, who's not a materialist. Who's not a materialist. He doesn't believe that consciousness is just part of brain function. He's a brain scientist. And he says some very similar things about context that I've been trying to say in a more clumsy way that maybe we'll come back to, that everything will be, all experience will be interpreted through a framework, through a lens of context, and that will give it some meaning or other. So maybe that's all I'll say for this evening. Unless you think I should add anything, Maitreyabandhu? Looking to Maitreyabandhu. So what we'll do on the retreat is explore both in meditation, but in these evening talks, these 4 myths that Subhuti coined, and look at their advantages and their disadvantages in life, in meditation, but also what they tell us about the nature of enlightenment, and see what happens after that. So I hope that you'll get something out of this retreat. I hope it'll be fruitful. It is work in progress, as Maitreyabandhu was saying. I don't think any of us, me or Maitreyabandhu, Subhuti might have, but I'm still trying to get my head around this, and it is exploratory. I hope you'll join in that spirit of let's explore this together. Does it stimulate? Is it helpful? And do sort of ask questions if you're moved to or provoked to do that.